When influential figures made mistakes in ancient times, they suffered a remarkable punishment. Damnatio Memoriae translates to damnation from memory, and it revolved around removing every trace of the condemned name from public records. This could be the removal of inscriptions, but even went as far as carving out the person from sculptures and paintings. The Egyptian pharaoh Hatshepsut and the Roman emperor Commodus are some of the most famous people who suffered this fate. Unfortunately for English painter John William Godward, he was erased from memory as well by his own family after his self-inflicted demise. Only one picture of the man survived, as well as a single presumed self-portrait in one of his paintings. Who was this little-known English neoclassical painter, and why is he the prime example of being born in the wrong century? Let's take a closer look at this tragic story and why his delicate and colorful paintings deserve just a little bit more than what they got in the early 1900s. John William Godward was born on August 9, 1861, in Wilton Grove, Wimbledon, a suburb of London. This makes him a contemporary of world-famous artists such as Vincent van Gogh, Edvard Munch, and Henri Matisse. Unlike van Gogh, Munch, and Matisse, Godward didn't embrace the new style of painting that was emerging in the second half of the 19th century, and he rather focused his efforts on neoclassical art. The main reason why he chose this path was because he had a great admiration for this man, Dutch painter Laurens Alma Tadema. Born and raised in the Netherlands, Alma Tadema studied at the Royal Academy of Antwerp before permanently settling in London in 1870. The Dutch painter wasn't just knighted, he was also the final person in history to become a denizen in 1873, a special privilege in the United Kingdom. Although we know very little about Godward's childhood, the fact that he was just 12 years old when this happened makes it easy to understand why he looked up to the Dutch master. If you want to understand how upper-class Roman citizens lived, then the paintings of Laurens Alma Tadema will definitely provide you with an abundance of insights. There's another interesting fact that linked both artists together, which was their interest in archaeology. The Dutch painter did a lot of research and meticulously depicted ancient objects how they actually looked like thousands of years ago. This also included the archaeological settings that can be seen in many of his paintings. Godward took a similar approach, and because of the abundance of marble decorations in their paintings, their works are classified as part of the marble school. The English painter also specialized in painting animal furs, which he studied intensely and painted to perfection in many of his works. By the turn of the 20th century, artistic ideals changed radically. Both Alma Tadema and John William Godward didn't follow the trend. This element played an important part in Godward's demise, but more about this later on. Especially the Dutch painter was an outspoken critic of the colorful and often absurd paintings produced by the likes of Matisse and Picasso. Regardless, the neoclassical paintings of John William Godward fell out of favor with the general public. When his main patron Laurens Alma Tadema died in 1912, it was pretty much the final nail in the coffin of the type of art he produced. Now here's an interesting anecdote of how that went in terms of sale value of their neoclassical paintings. One of Alma Tadema's most renowned works, titled The Finding of Moses, was sold for a respectable £5,250 in 1904. This painting was subsequently sold for just £835 in 1935, and even for merely £252 in 1960. Tastes in art changed constantly, and the two next times this very same painting was sold emphasized this perfectly. In 1995, the lucky owner was able to sell The Finding of Moses for £1.75 million. In 2010, this buyer sold it once again for almost $36 million at Sotheby's in New York City. The best price fetched for one of Godward's paintings was $567,000 in 1995, which isn't too shabby either. All this is great, but it didn't help John William Godward during his lifetime. All this means is that he was definitely a man who was born in the wrong century. So now let's take a closer look at his story, because I personally find it quite intriguing, to say the least. As I already mentioned, we know very little about his childhood and youth, apart from the fact that he grew up in a very strict home. He was the eldest of 5 children, and although he was extremely talented, his parents disapproved of his artistic pursuit. They never approved of his career for the rest of his life, something that heavily weighed on John's shoulders. His father worked in an investment company, which was pretty much the opposite of what his son had in mind. Regardless of his difficulties, the copious amounts of talent he was blessed with allowed him to start displaying his paintings at the Royal Academy in London in 1887. This was about 8 years after his idol Lawrence Alma-Tadema became a member of the Royal Academy in London. If you closely look at the paintings that Godward left behind, then it becomes clear that he greatly admired a particular type of painting made by his Dutch colleague. These include lavish marble decorations, beautiful women dressed in ancient clothes, and idyllic landscapes. Although he was initially successful, this radically changed when the likes of Picasso and Matisse were making headlines in the early 1900s. Godward's dreamy paintings depict an idealized world that didn't exist anymore, and it was something that the new generation came to despise. To them, it was nothing more than upper-class people from the Victorian era who were dressed up in clothes from classical antiquity. What's fascinating, however, is that neoclassical art briefly revived during the 1860s and 1870s, unsurprisingly the period in which John William Godward was growing up. Although he has been classified as a pre-Raphaelite artist by some art historians, I consider him to be a pure neoclassical artist, but one with an extremely colorful palette. Unlike some artists, who changed their style radically when the style fell out of favor, such as Gustav Klimt for example, Godward stuck to his dreamy paintings. He continued to paint very similar paintings during the first 2 decades of the 20th century, and even moved to Italy with one of his models in 1912. This was around the time that his family cut all ties with him, something that clearly hurt the struggling painter. He moved back to England in 1921 and committed suicide a year later on December 13, 1922. That was the final straw for his ashamed family, and just like in Roman times, they condemned him to a Damnatio Memoriae. Not only do we only have one picture of the man, but because his family burned all of his papers, we don't know much about his life. He left behind a suicide note that read, "The world is not big enough for me and Picasso." Although the fact that his family cut all ties with him surely played a role in this drama, this note tells something very important. It's clear that John William Godward suffered a lot from the lack of popularity of his art and the continuous struggle to make ends meet. The new generation of artists had taken over, and there seemed to be no way back for the painter who never really changed his style throughout his career. It's a tragic story indeed, and although the type of art he produced wasn't appreciated at the time, the quality of his paintings was second to none. The accurate depictions of ancient Roman architecture, the way he incorporated his models into classical settings, and the idyllic landscapes that served as backgrounds were all of the highest quality. I think we can all agree that John William Godward deserved just a little bit more appreciation for his art during his lifetime. I hope that this video helped a bit to put his name just a little firmer on the timeline of art history.